Hey, everybody, I am Ron Cantor, the president of Shalano TV and the regional director for God TV right here in Israel. And it is just such a joy to be with you. I'm so excited because it's Hanukkah time. And I know some of you are watching this right before Hanukkah. Some of you are watching it in the midst of Hanukkah. But wherever you are, I want to wish you a happy Hanukkah. And, growing up Jewish, we celebrated Hanukkah every year, and it was the best holiday of the year. It's not the Jewish Christmas, but it does come around the same time of Christmas, typically in mid to late December. This year, it's in late November. It begins. It's an 8-day holiday, and for 8 days, we get gifts, and that was the main focus growing up as a young child. And it was difficult because my parents, they would buy me 8 gifts. They would wrap them and they would be downstairs. And I would come under such temptation. I would want to open them. What is in those boxes? And sometimes I would peek and then I would tape it back and they would know it. But it's okay because we're celebrating Hanukkah. Now, again, Hanukkah is not the Jewish Christmas, but it does have something in common with Christmas in that a lot of folks focus just on the gifts in the same way that a lot of people, when it comes to Christmas, they focus on the wrong thing, the gifts. Also on Hanukkah, we do that as well. But in the same way that Christmas is all about Yeshua, Jesus, Hanukkah is about the power of God to deliver, to watch over the Jewish people. So having said that, let's get into the teaching. Hanukkah is an 8-day holiday, and it begins on the 25th day of Kislev. And it's a fixed day, but Israel, the Hebrew calendar, is a lunar solar calendar. So if you go by the Gregorian calendars, most of the world does, it seems to you that Hanukkah is changing everywhere, but those who go by the Hebrew calendar, they just think you're confused and your calendar's changing every year, And this year, if you remember in the fall holidays, they were very early. And so this year, Hanukkah is on November 28th, and it's going to, again, last for 8 days. It's a fun time here in Israel. Everybody is, it's a festive mood, like all over the world during Christmas time, or at least in the Western Hemisphere, or rather the Northern Hemisphere. It's cold. It gets a little bit cold here, particularly in Jerusalem. And you might be wondering, well, if I see somebody celebrating Hanukkah, what do I say? Well, if you're speaking English, you can just say Happy Hanukkah. That's pretty easy, right? You can remember that. But if you want to impress them, you can say Chag Hanukkah Sameach, or just Chanukah Sameach, which means Happy Hanukkah. The word Chag in Hebrew means holiday. Chag, Chanukah, which means Hanukkah, Sameach. So Chag Chanukah Sameach, Happy Hanukkah, or Happy Hanukkah holiday. Now, if you really want to impress people, you could say Chag Orim Sameach, which means Happy Festival of Lights, because Hanukkah is, as we're going to learn as we get into the teaching, it is the Festival of Lights. Okay, now, the word Hanukkah, which is how we say it in Hebrew, it means dedication. And the reason we're celebrating it is because a long time ago, over 2,000 years ago, the Maccabees, who are they? You're going to learn in a minute. They had to rededicate the temple in Jerusalem. Now, why did they have to rededicate it? It's because there was a guy by the name of Antiochus Epiphanes, and he desecrated it. Now, who was he? He oversaw he was the king of the Greek Syrian Empire, and part of the territory that they had Syria, they had Greece, obviously, they had territory east of there, but they also had Judea. And so they were over the Jewish people in that time. And you can find this story, if you want to read about it, in First Maccabees, which is in the Apocrypha for Roman Catholics. It's part of their Bible for most evangelicals like me. It's not part of the Bible, but it's good history. There's a lot that you can learn there. And this guy, Antiochus Epiphanes, as we said, he was over the Seleucid Empire. Again, that's the Greek Syria. They extended over Judea. He wanted to go down into Egypt, and we'll get into that in a minute. But he had this name, Antiochus Epiphanes. Now, Epiphanes wasn't his actual name. It was a description, and it meant God manifest. So he had a pretty high opinion of himself. He thought that he was a deity. He thought that he was a god. And his people who didn't like him, they would call him Antiochus Epiphanes, which means Antiochus the madman. Don't let him hear you say that, because he was pretty demonic and he had a short temper. And he makes this play to overtake Egypt back about, I would say, I think it's the year 167 before Yeshua, before BC. And the Romans, who were his friends in the beginning, they helped get him into power. He was actually a Roman slave. It's kind of a weird story. His dad, in order to make peace with the Romans, had to give him to the Romans. So he ends up getting educated by the Romans. And then when he's set free because his dad dies, and so his brother, who takes over as king, has to give his son as a slave to Rome. So now he's smart, he's educated, he speaks all these languages. He goes back, and because his brother dies, and he makes a play for the throne, he becomes the king of the Seleucid Empire. And now he wants to go and extend that empire. He's going to fight with the Egyptians. But his buddies, the Romans, who taught him everything he knows, they say, no way. We're going to come down and we're going to stop you. We're going to help the Egyptians. So he is very upset about this. He's very embarrassed. He decides not to fight. And he's going to go from Egypt back home to Antioch, which is, I think that's where his throne was. And so on his way back to Antioch, if you look at a map, you have to go through Jerusalem. It's the Isaiah 19 road. And so he's going back up to Antioch. He goes through Jerusalem. He's angry. He's embarrassed. And then there was a nasty rumor that was being spread throughout the Jewish people, and that was that he died. That in this Egyptian war or whatever, that somehow he got killed, and the people were worshiping. They were celebrating. They were happy because they didn't like him. He was not a good king. He was an evil king, and so the Jews of Judea, of Jerusalem, they're happy. They're celebrating. And then he finds out that they're happy, that they're celebrating that he's dead, and he's not excited about that. So on his way home, he decides to take out his anger, his wrath on the Jewish people. Now, at that time, many Jewish people had been Hellenized. That means that they were living according to Greek culture, but there were still a lot of Jewish people that were very faithful to Torah, and there were some who were in the middle. It's kind of like Israel today. You've got very Orthodox Jews, you've got completely secular Jews, and then a large part of in the middle that they love the traditions, they celebrate the holidays, but they're not so, hardcore Orthodox. Now, when he comes back to Judea, he unleashes upon the Jews his demonic fury. His goal was not merely to check on his vassal state, Judea. He wanted to destroy any future hope in the religion of Judaism. Let me just say here that Antiochus Epiphanes, he was a type and shadow of another guy who would come later, the Antichrist. You'll learn later when you see some of the things that he does, he's just like the Antichrist. He is literally a prophetic type and shadow of what the Antichrist will do later. And there's no doubt that the same demonic power that will possess the Antichrist figure was living in this guy. He was possessed and he wanted to destroy the Jewish people. Now, why was he so angry at the Jewish people? Number one, Satan has long targeted the Jewish people. It's been said that there have been 52 attempted genocides against God's chosen people. 52 more than any other group in history. Somehow we're still here. Friends, it is an absolute miracle that I am in Tel Aviv right now sharing with you, because again, 52 times somebody tried to wipe out our people, at least at some level, going all the way back to Haman up to Hitler. Secondly, the fact that the Jews worshiped one God, well, that was offensive to, a lot of the people in the Greek-speaking world, particularly to this Roman emperor, or rather this Seleucid emperor, who himself was a deity. And so often they would indulge the Jewish people. You can worship your one silly little God, whatever. Just pay your taxes and don't rebel against Rome or Persia or Babylon or whatever. But it irked them. It bothered them. It just seemed absolutely absurd. They were the only folks in the world worshiping one God. Number three, of course, the idea of the Jewish people being the chosen people, it didn't always sit well with other people. And, maybe you are not Jewish. Most of you are not Jewish. And when you hear the Jewish people talk about being the chosen people, maybe that bothers you. Maybe it offends you. And one of the reasons it's offensive is because they don't understand why we were chosen. We weren't chosen to be better. We were not chosen to be superior. We were chosen to serve the world by shining the light of Yeshua to the nations, by shining the light of Torah to the nations, by saying to the nations, there's only one God. And then ultimately, after Yeshua, it was the Jewish apostles who took the good news to the nations. So our chosenness as Jewish people is to be a blessing to the world, not to rule over the world, not to be arrogant, not like the Third Reich, where they thought that the Aryan race was superior to all other races. No, Jesus taught what it meant to be chosen. He taught what it meant to be a leader, and that's always to serve, to be a blessing, to help others out, not to lord it over them. And so there was this confusion when the Jewish people saw themselves as the chosen people. This was offensive to people like Antiochus Epiphanes. And then on a practical level, as I said earlier, there was this rumor that spread that he was dead, and people believed it, and they were happy about it. How would you feel if people, when they heard of your demise and they were celebrating, they were throwing parties? So he was upset about that. But let's get back to our story. Antiochus returns he's on his way back to Antioch, and he's still fuming. And he makes this decree that the Seleucid kingdom would be one people with one culture, one custom, and there would be only one religion, his religion. And so he passes this law. Let me read from Dr. Craig Bloomberg. He's written this wonderful book about the history around the New Covenant. And he says, after Antiochus's next Egyptian expedition, he again looted Jerusalem, set fire to parts of the city. He slaughtered many, all on the Sabbath, because the Jewish people at that time, they would not fight on the Sabbath. By the way, well, I won't get in on that, but they probably should have fought on the Sabbath, because if your ox is in a ditch, you get him out. If someone's trying to hurt you, anyways, they wouldn't fight on the Sabbath, and so he ends up killing a bunch of them who wouldn't resist. In addition, he made virtually all of Judaism's distinctivenesses illegal, and he transgressed its holiest laws by renaming the Jerusalem temple for Zeus Olympius, setting up a pagan altar in the Jewish temple where he sacrificed a pig, a swine, and the most unclean animal in the Jewish world. He prohibited circumcision and Sabbath observance on the threat of death, by the way. Circumcise your kid, you're dead. Celebrate the Sabbath, you're dead. Banning and burning copies of the Torah and ordering sacrifices to pagan gods at various altars around the country. So they would go all over the country and they would create other altars, and they would force the local priest to sacrifice to these false gods of his. So what was the mood of the Jewish people as they looked at this guy, Antiochus Epiphanes? It's interesting because Bloomberg goes on to say that because of Daniel 11, 1 through 30, that predicts in detail the political events from the time of the Persian Empire until Antiochus IV, that's the fellow we're talking about, even though it doesn't mention his name, many Jews understandably took verses 31 to 35, Daniel's famous abomination of desolation, to refer to Antiochus, his desecration of the temple. So as he's desecrating the temple and passing these laws, they're thinking this is the guy that Daniel spoke about. And so they saw it through prophetic eyes. Now, and it was a fulfillment of that. It wasn't the ultimate fulfillment of that. That will come in the person of the Antichrist in the end times. But there's been at least 3 fulfillments of that. Number one, that one. Then you have Titus when he destroys Jerusalem in 70, and then ultimately in the Antichrist. Well, there was one Jewish guy, and this just didn't sit well with him. And his name was Mattiyahu. And he was from the Heshmonaim family. He and his sons they were just not into this. They were willing to die. And so when soldiers came to Modi'in, by the way, that's just about 20 minutes from here. Modi'in, right in the Judean foothills, right as you begin to get into the mountains. That Tel Aviv's flat, and then you go about 10 miles, and then you start to get into the mountains that get higher and higher until you get to the mountains that surround Jerusalem. And so when the soldiers came to Modi'in, to their city, and they set up an altar, and they demanded that Mattiyahu sacrifice to their false gods, Mattiyahu said, "No, I won't do it. I serve God. I serve Yahweh. I'm willing to die for my belief in Yahweh. I will in no way sacrifice to these false gods." Well, this Hellenized Jewish guy, again, a Greek cultured Jewish guy, he says, "I'll do it." And he goes to sacrifice on the pagan altar. Well, Mattiyahu pulls out his sword and he takes down this guy who was sacrificing to the false gods, and then he kills the representative of the king, the soldier, as well. And then him and his sons, who become nicknamed the Maccabees, Judah Maccabee, that was his oldest son. Every Jewish kid in the world, what you may, a lot of kids grow up knowing about Santa Claus. We grew up learning about Judah Maccabee. And Judah Maccabee was the ultimate Jewish hero because he was the oldest son of Mattiyahu, and he led in this rebellion. He led in this revolt against the Seleucid kingdom, the Greek Syrian kingdom, and they fled to the foothills, the Judean foothills. That was their terrain. They began to fight this guerrilla warfare fight against the Syrians. They were outnumbered 6-1. And so, and again, they were nicknamed the Maccabees. We say in Hebrew, Maccabi. In fact, the local Tel Aviv basketball team is Maccabi Tel Aviv. My insurance company is called Maccabi. There's a lot of things in Israel named after these guys, the Hammers. And of course, Judah Maccabee, the leader of the Hammers, was the Hammer himself. The largest national park in Israel is in that area, Modi'in, and it's called Ben Shimon. And let me just tell you something. I've been there. It's beautiful, by the way. It is gorgeous. It's kind of like Lord of the Rings in that the scenery every 50 meters or so. It's like you're in this new, there's a field, there's a path, there's a cliff, there's a rock. Everything's different, constantly changing. In fact, I went biking there not long after I immigrated, and I got lost. It was before GPS. I got lost. I got a little scared. I got a little nervous. I found my way home. It took me about an hour to get back. But I can only imagine what these foreigners were doing, fighting. Again, they were outnumbered 6-1, but this was their turf. This was their terrain. And let's not forget, God was with them. The God of Israel was fighting with them as they stood up for righteousness, and they would not sacrifice to pagan gods. It was after Jeremiah prophesies hundreds of years before that Israel was going to go into the Babylonian exile, primarily because of idol worship. And after as hard as that was, the Babylonian exile, the Jews never went back to idol worship. And so when Mattiyahu sees this, he's like, "No way, we're never going back." And the Lord blessed them. Bloomberg writes they repeatedly surprised and defeated outposts of the much larger Syrian army, though otherwise little used tactics of guerrilla warfare, including nighttime attacks from their mountain hideouts and a willingness to defend themselves and fight on the Sabbath. Smart, like I said earlier. And this is where we get the word Hanukkah from, because eventually it takes a few years, but on the 25th of Kislev, they make it to the Jewish temple. They make it to the Jewish temple, and once they get there, it's a little bit like 1967. And if you haven't seen our Out of Zion series, we did 4 episodes on the 6-Day War. In 1967, when the Israeli soldiers heard that Jerusalem had been captured. You understand, for 19 years, it had been under Jordanian rule. And before that, it was under British and Turk. It was never free. It was never under Jewish rule, but at least you could go there. But for 19 years, the Jews had been kicked out of the most holy city of their faith. And so when the soldiers heard about it, they literally left wherever they were fighting, and they went to Jerusalem. Hundreds and thousands of Jerusalemmers flowed into Jerusalem. They flooded the city, tears falling down, even non-religious ones. They're like, "I don't even believe in God, but I'm crying because of the miracle that had happened." Hopefully they began to believe after that. But it's the same thing here. They had been locked out of their city. They had built this fortress, the army of Antiochus Epiphanes, and they had uh, kept the Jews from freely worshiping there. And so they go in, they take over Jerusalem, and now they have to cleanse the temple because it had been defiled by this pig being sacrificed on the altar. So they had to rededicate the temple, and that's what Hanukkah means in English. It means dedication. It's the feast of dedication. This, remember I said that somebody special celebrated this? It's in the New Testament. Jesus celebrated this holiday. This is actually the holiday that he celebrated during, I guess, Christmas time, because he didn't celebrate Christmas because he wasn't a holiday yet. And I actually believe, a lot of people believe that he was born during Sukkot. In John chapter 1, verse 14, it says that the Word became flesh and tabernacled among us. Maybe that's a clue. I actually believe that he was probably born in the spring with the Passover lambs, right? John prophesies over him, behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. Why were the shepherds out at night? Probably because the lambs were giving birth. They would give birth once a year during that time. That's why in Passover you would take a lamb that was 1 year old. It had been born the year before. It's not something that we're going to fight over. No matter when you think he was born, the exciting thing is he was born. And not only that, he died, he rose from the dead, and our names are written in heaven because of him. But we do know that in Jerusalem, he would often come to Jerusalem for the holidays. He was there for the Feast of Dedication. We get it in John chapter 10, verse 22 and 23. It says, then came the feast or festival of dedication at Jerusalem. It was winter, and Yeshua was in the temple courts walking in Solomon's colonnade. And while Hanukkah's not one of the 7 feasts, it looks like Yeshua kind of sort of makes it one. Well, I mean, I'm not making a new doctrine here, but he did celebrate it. So it's good to learn about it. And as a Jewish person living here in Israel, it really is a wonderful, special time here in the Holy Land. Now, there's one other thing I'm going to tell you about, and that is the miracle of oil. So the miracle of the oil, let me read you from one of the most revered sages in Judaism, Rabbi Moses Maimonides. He wrote this about 1,000 years ago. And he said, when on the 25th of Kislev, the Jews had emerged victorious over their foes and destroyed them, they re-entered the temple where they had found only 1 jar of pure oil, enough to be lit for only 1 single day. See, in the temple, there's something called the Ner Tamid, the eternal lamp, and it has to be lit all the time. And of course, during the 3 years, the bad guys were in there, it wasn't lit, but they only had oil for 1 day. Yet they, as they were, well, let me keep reading here. Yet they used it for lighting the required set of lamps for 8 days until they managed to press olives and produce pure oil. Because of this, the sages in that generation ruled that the 8 days, beginning with the 25th of Kislev, should be observed as days of rejoicing and praising the Lord. Lamps are lit in the evening all over the doors of the homes on each of the 8 nights so as to display the miracle. That's why another name for Hanukkah is the Festival of Lights. These days are called Hanukkah, when it's forbidden to lament or to fast, just as it is in the days of Purim. Lighting the lamps during the 8 day, and Purim is the holiday where we rejoice over the victory that God gave Esther and Mordecai over Haman, and they weren't able to commit genocide against the Jewish people. Lighting the lamps during the 8 days of Hanukkah is a religious duty imposed upon the sages. So what we have is, you can see behind me, that's called a Chanukiah. It's a type of menorah. And as you can see, it has 9 candles. And you say, wait a minute, Ron, we caught you. There's 9 candles, and you said there's only 8 days. Well, first of all, let's talk about those 8 days, because he kind of glossed over it quickly. What he's saying is it was a miracle. There was only oil for 1 day, and it lasted 8 days. Now, a lot of people believe that this story is legend, but he believed it, one of our most revered rabbis, and many religious Jews believe this story, and that's easy for God, right? So let's believe it. Why not? And so why is there 9 candles instead of 8? Now, here's what's very interesting. Yeshua says, I am the light of the world, right? He comes to the world, he gives light to every man. Well, this candle right here in the middle, that is called the shamash, or the servant candle. What did Yeshua say to be a leader? You have to serve. He came to seek and to serve. He came as a servant, not as God. He didn't come down and say, hey, I'm the God man, I'm ruling, everybody worship me. He came, in the likeness of human flesh. He humbled himself as a servant in the likeness of man, as Philippians chapter 2 says. So Yeshua is that servant. And what you do is you take that candle in the middle and you light it first, because without God, we can have no light. And then, now again, this is something that Jewish people do every year. Jewish people who don't believe in Yeshua, they take that middle candle, they light it, and on the first day of Hanukkah, they would light that candle. And then on the second day, they would light 2 candles, and so on. So it comes down. The middle candle comes down. Yeshua came down from heaven to earth. It comes down, and then it gives light to the other candles. We represent those other candles, those who believe in him, who have received his light. What incredible type, shadow, symbolism, and yet we have to pray for the Jewish people that their eyes would be open and that they would see this incredible, powerful truth that Yeshua is that shamash, that servant candle. Now, another couple things that we do during this time is we pray 3 prayers during Hanukkah. I'll pray them real quickly, and this is as we're lighting the candles. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lahadlik ner shel Hanukkah. And that is a prayer thanking, I'll just read it. Blessed are you, O Lord God, King of the universe, who has commanded us to light the Hanukkah lights. The second prayer we pray is Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'asa nisim la'avotenu b'yamim hahem bizman hazeh. Praised are you, blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who performed wondrous deeds for our ancestors in those ancient days at this season. And then lastly, we pray, Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam shechianu v'kimanu v'higanu lazman hazeh. And this is a famous prayer called the Shechianu, and you're just thanking God that you got us here, that we're still here, we're still alive, and we made it to this season because of you, God. Another fun thing we do is we play a little game called Dreidel. We have a little song, and it goes like this. If you want me to sing it, it's, well, I have a little dreidel. I made it out of clay, and when it's dry and ready, oh, dreidel, I will play, not pray. Praying is good as well. Oh, dreidel, 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 I made it out of clay. When it's dry and ready, oh, dreidel, I will play. And it's this little spinner with the letters Hey, Nun, Gimel, and either a shin or a pei. Why? Because it means a great miracle happened here. But if you're in America or you're in Ukraine or you're somewhere else in the world, you say a great miracle happened there. So you change that last letter and the kids play and it's fun. We eat all kinds of food that it should be called the Festival of Calories, because everything we eat has to be fried in oil because of the miracle of the oil. So we have these jelly donuts called sufganiyot. They're so good. I eat one every year. And then we have these crispy potato pancakes, and they're so good. It's just a lot of fun to celebrate Hanukkah. But the most important thing is the story that the Jewish people, almost 200 years before Yeshua came, they fought for their independence. They rebelled against a pagan ruler that was demanding that they sacrifice to false gods. And they said, no, we will not do it. Sometimes it takes one person to be a hero, to be a champion, to be a David against Goliath. And that's what Mattiyahu did, and that's what his sons did. They stood up against this pagan king, and God blessed them. So I want to bless you during this Hanukkah season. I want to wish you a very happy Hanukkah, a Chag Chanukah Sameach. Can you say that with me? Chag Chanukah Sameach. Say it to your Jewish friends. Wish them a happy Hanukkah. And I wish you a Merry Christmas and a wonderful season in Yeshua's name. Amen.